Hello and welcome to Pods Above Replacement, part of the Padres Hot Tub Podcast Network. My name is Raphie Cantor. I am the producer of Padres Hot Tub, and joining me from the Mile High City, he's telling me there's a chance. It's John Precoda!
Life is a fragile thing, Rafe. 1 minute you're chewing on a burger, the next minute you're dead meat.
And on that happy note, let's begin our 15th episode, John. Did you know this?
15? Whoa, 15. Nice.
Yeah, we've been doing this for a little bit. You know, we've got our sea legs. If there's anything that you guys listening or watching at home want to say, first of all, you could say congratulations in the comments. That would be nice. Yeah. But if you don't want to do that, you can tell us what you'd like to see on the show. We always love active participation, but speaking for myself, I'm very proud of the fact that we've gotten to 15 episodes and we seem to have found a niche audience of nerds who like us, who want to talk about a truly frustrating team, but in a very interesting way, our beloved San Diego Padres. We hope you're watching us on YouTube. We're always going to be mentioning the YouTube Music app as well. It's a great way to watch us. Go to the podcast section. You'll find us there. You can be walking around in your pocket, you know, playing this in the background. And then when you want to see the fun data that we're talking about, you can pull it out on your phone and the video will be right there. Please also subscribe as well. It's a great way to help us find the show. We had a ticket giveaway that was a great success, and I'm not going to spoil it, John, but we are going to be giving away a autographed ball in July to new subscriber, to anyone who subscribes and comments on our videos. So stay tuned for that. Listen to Padres Hot Tub this week, and we will drop whose autographed ball that will be.
I hope it's Eric Owens. Come on, Eric Owens.
Going into the vault. The vault underneath Petco.
It's what everybody wants. That and a dirty jersey.
Do you remember? This is such a sidetrack, but do you remember when we were younger? Like Disney had a vault that like they'd be like, you have to buy the Little Mermaid now, otherwise it's going in the vault, and like created like artificial demand and like supply shock. Yep. It's like it's the craziest like smart. I'm sure they teach it in business and econ classes, but like that's like some crazy cartel shit that they were doing like a really long time ago.
You better subscribe now, or this episode's going in the vault, everybody.
It's going in the vault. Yeah, the vault is like Chris Reed's garage in North Hollywood. You know,
it's on VHS tape.
Yeah, exactly. We actually like copy it onto worse quality mediums to record it. So last but not least, we'll plug before we get into the show. Please become a patron. We have a thriving Discord channel for Pods Above Replacement on the Padres Hot Tub Discord. Met lots of cool people. It's been really nice, by the way, to see people who have joined the Discord lately and like shouted us out as like part of the reason that they're like joining. That was cool and fun to see, and it's really cool to talk to you guys. So without further ado, I'm gonna throw a tweet on screen right now. That hopefully you're watching on YouTube so you can see it, but for our audio folks, I'm going to read it. This is from Padres Twitter shitlord mens rea at Hasung's Rim. He is my favorite follow on Padres Twitter easily. It is a good, very comical, follow on Twitter, which is a hellhole in and of itself, but I highly recommend him. Has very smart things to say about the team. But he did tweet something just probably a week ago at this point that said, if someone mentions the 2021 Braves or the 2019 Nationals one more time, I'm going to kill myself. Well, Hasung's Rim, we're going to have a wellness call for you, a wellness check, because that is exactly what we're talking about in this episode. We are talking about the 2019 Nationals, the 2021 Braves, and how the 2023 San Diego Padres compared to them. Of course, those two teams went on to win the World Series after pretty abysmal starts to their seasons. And there's going to be a word that John and I are going to be using a lot on this show. So we're going to have our first ever word of the day, John. Isn't that nice? We were just educating people on numbers. Now it's grammar. So the word of the day today is nader. Not Ralph, but, you know, nadir. It's spelled Nadir, and that is defined as actually, it's more traditional use. It's first of all, it's from the Arabic nadir, which literally means the opposite to the zenith, because nadir is the kind of the lowest point of observation on a celestial body, and the zenith is the highest most point. So it's an astronomy term, but it has come to mean like the worst moment or the moment of least hope and least achievement. That's according to the Cambridge Dictionary. So we're going to be talking about the nadir of these teams and how the Padres have hopefully hit their nadir. But John, before we start talking about when they got to that moment, let's kind of talk about who these teams were and why people thought they were going to do so well at the beginning of each of their respective seasons.
Yeah, and I just wanted to bring up that these were good teams. They were good teams that started off poorly and, got better as the year went on. But they had stars. They had talent that is similar to the Padres. They weren't not just any team out there that started poorly. And that's why I get the Mens Rea tweet. It's that you can't just like pick these specific examples, specific counterexamples and go, oh, you're saying there's a chance like Dumb and Dumber do. These aren't teams that are just like random examples that happen to have a good year, though. They're star-studded teams that started off poorly and then had the stars to carry them through the playoffs. And so I want to go through some of the names just so that everybody can kind of remember the 2019-2021 season. Like I said, they're stars. They're star teams that were kind of built for the playoffs in a manner that I would suggest is similar to the Padres, where AJ Preller seems to have been building for the playoffs. He has those 3 dependable starters towards the top of the rotation so that they can carry most of the innings in the playoffs, and then some studs at the back of the bullpen to get so that those like 5, 6, 7 guys are carrying hopefully 75+% of the total innings pitched in the playoffs. And you look at how the Nationals were built. 3-star pitchers. They had Strasburg back when he was at the height of his powers, Patrick Corbin when he was at the height of his powers, Max Scherzer, and then a bullpen that had Sean Doolittle like at the back of the bullpen, getting things down or putting things down. And then in the lineup, they had Juan Soto, a star who has some overlap with our team, you might know. And then they also had Adam Eaton, who was having a good year that year. And Anthony Rendon was obviously a star. Trey Turner was a star. They were stars and scrubs roster as well in some sorts, but also built for the playoffs. And the Braves weren't that different. They had the stars. They had Freddie Freeman. They had Ozzie Albies. They had Austin Riley. They had Acuna, who ended up getting hurt, but they replaced him with guys who ended up being successful down the stretch. Jorge Soler just went off towards the end of the season, and Eddie Rosario was an absolute star in the playoffs. And then they also had a good top of the rotation that was successful both towards the end of the year and then carrying them into the playoffs in Max Fried, Charlie Morton, and Ian Anderson. And then AJ Minter and Will Smith were the kind of guys towards the end of the bullpen that were, like I said, pinning things down towards the end. So it's not just any random, poor start teams where like the Pittsburgh Pirates were probably also bad in 2019 and 2021. These are star-studded teams who started poorly, which we will argue, I think, or at least I will argue, have a lot more correlation to the 2023 San Diego Padres than you might think.
Yes, absolutely. So one thing that's important to note about both the Nats and the Braves in their respective World Series years, they're both wild card teams. So they had to clear that hurdle, and this was at a time when the wild card game was just one game, which is about as close to a coin flip as you can get in baseball. So it's important to remember that when we're talking about these teams is that the playoffs always involve a certain amount of luck, but like having to clear the wild card hurdle is, especially at that time, was just like a huge like coin flip like barrier. So with that in mind, the 2019 Nationals, they finished 93-69. Now, before the season started, they were by far and away the favorites in the NL East in 2019. They were projected by Fangraphs to win 90.5 games. The next closest team was the Phillies at 85.2. So they were projected to be 5 wins better than anyone else. They had a 53.2% chance of winning their division and a 79.1% chance of making the playoffs at all. So very, strong, favorites to make the playoffs. And basically, here's what happened when they hit their nadir. in 2019. This was on May 23rd. You're going to be looking at a graph from Fangraphs that kind of shows their playoff odds right now if you're watching us on YouTube. And you can see on May 23rd, I mean, it was like the sad stonks meme, like where it just was like slowly sliding down. And basically, they had a 22.2% chance of making the playoffs on May 23rd. They actually have, you can see a little further on in June, a second kind of mini nadir that's not as low. That was on June 15th. They had a 33.1% chance of making the playoffs, which is a little bit comparable to the period that we're going to be talking about for the Padres. But if we're talking about their actual lowest point statistically, that was when the Nationals were 19-31 after 50 games, 12 games below 500, 10 games out of their division, and had a 22.2% chance of making the playoffs. The Braves, on the other hand, hit their nadir much later. The Braves, prior to the season, were not predicted to be the division champions. That honor went to the New York Mets at the time. The Mets had a 91.5 projected win total from Fangraphs prior to the season starting, and the Braves had an 88.0, so 3.5 games worse. The Braves, however, still had a 63.8% chance of making the playoffs, which is good but not great. You know, that's like that you're just starting to get above coin flip territory. And similar to the 2019 Nationals playoff odds graph, the 2021 Braves playoff graph is a much slower decline, where it's basically like a very consistent downslope from April until July 23rd, which is when they hit their nadir. And their nadir was a 7% chance of making the playoffs. This is 97 games into the season. The Braves had a record of 47-50. They were 6 games out of their division, and they were only projected by Fangraphs at that point to win 79.8 games. That is what they thought once the Braves had reached that 47-50 mark. Let's compare that to the... Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, so that's not what we want. We do not want to get down to 7% odds. And they were setting like historic amounts of losses before their turnaround. They had 101 games under 500, which is by far and away the record for any team that ended up, making it to the World Series. 101 games and 7% odds. And they didn't they lose Acuna right around there?
Yes, they lost Acuna on July 11th.
Yeah, so then July 23rd, can you imagine being in their their fan group where okay, we just lost Acuna. It's the 23rd. We have a 7% chance of going to the playoffs. Freddie Freeman is a free agent after this year, and we don't know whether he's going to sign with us. Oof, that the Braves Discord on July 23rd, it is a dark place.
The Braves above ground pool Discord was not doing well at the time. So that brings us to the 2023 Padres, who prior to the season were projected to win 91.5 games by Fangraphs. Now, it's worth pointing out that's more than any of these teams. Fangraphs projected that given the schedules and everything, the relative strengths and weaknesses, that the Padres would win more games. Now, it's worth saying that the NL East is a stronger division. And so, and this was prior to balanced schedules that we have this year for the first time. So these teams were going to have to play 70 some odd games against NL East competition. So it's worth noting that and why their win totals may be a little depressed, but at the same time, the Padres, 91.5 wins prior to the season. And they were projected to, have not only 55.4% odds of winning the division, but 85.3% odds of making the playoffs. Again, that is the highest number of any of these teams. So if you look on screen at what the Padres have done thus far, we're going to be talking about, by the way, the Padres up until June 21st of this year. So depending on when you're listening to this, if you're listening to this on the day it comes out, on Sunday the 25th, then that won't be that far away. But just we want to talk about the Padres up until their hopefully nadir on the year, knock on wood, because I think that that provides better context for the conversation that's going to be coming later in this episode. So June 21st, if you'll remember, this was the third of 4 games that the Padres played in San Francisco, and they lost all 3 of those games in seemingly incomprehensible fashion. They got walked off on Monday, the 19th. They got walked off again on Tuesday, the 20th. And then on Wednesday, the 21st, that was the game when Fernando Tatis Jr. Gunned down, I believe it was David VR at the plate. It was someone. So it was gunned down a Giants runner. And the throw brought Gary Sanchez into the baseline, quote unquote, of the Giants runner. And even though the throw beat the Giants runner by 1,000 feet, the play was deemed as obstruction on Gary Sanchez's part. The run was awarded, and then the Giants went on to score 2 more runs in that inning, and that proved to be the difference in the game.
And every Padres fan wanted to tear their hair out. We were all just super angry. I think it was VR that got the hit, and I think it was Sable, the catcher, that got thrown out by 20
yes,
odd feet.
I think you're right. Yes, as John said, that was the point when, much like mens rea, there were folks on suicide watch in the Padres fandom, and it started. The word curse started to come out of people's mouths, which I said this on Padres Hot Tub this week, but I hate that so much. It is retconned loser mentality to say that we're cursed, or San Diego sports curse. It makes my skin crawl. So we will not be talking about curses on this here podcast. This is an F4 podcast, and this is an anti-curse podcast. But to kind of put a bow on this and talk about where the Padres stood at their nadir compared to these other teams, the Padres were 74 games into the season. They were 35-39, 9.5 games out of their division, and a 43.1% chance of making the playoffs. Now, it's worth remembering, that is a much better chance than these other teams, okay? The Braves were down to 7%, which is stupid unlikely. So
yeah.
That's the Nationals were earlier in the season at 22.2%, but in their second nadir, which was on June 15th, so around the same time as the Padres, they were at a 33.1% chance of making the playoffs, which is still worse than what the Padres, anything the Padres have touched this year. So it's worth keeping that in mind. And John, I know you wanted to take a closer look at what the kind of records and Pythag and everything that was going on with the teams at that time.
Yeah, so I included the last couple of days because we are recording this on Saturday, June 24th. So we've put up 2 more wins on the docket, and people are a little bit more cheerful, like Raphie is right now, than maybe that nadir, looking for some promise, scoring 10 and 13 runs or whatever the last couple games, which is great for the Pythag, by the way. But the Nationals at the time, they were 37-40 right around now. So they, if we lose today, we would be 37-40. If we win, 38-39. But their Pythag gave them 2 more wins. They were 39-38 in terms of their Pythagorean record, which is just runs scored and runs against, what you would assume a record would be based on those numbers. They were 7-11 in 1-run games to that point, and 2-3 in extra innings games to that point, which, by the way, we would kill for at this time. But if we were 7-11 in 1-run games, we would be like, what? There was, I think, 5 games better. No, like 2-3 games better. That'd be nice. But and they ended up their season. It's in a eerily similar fashion to what you would expect the Padres to kind of end their season. They were terrible in 1-run games, even towards the end of the year, because they had that poor start. They finished 17-21 in 1-run games and 29-19 in blowout games. Which, does that sound familiar at all? That every time the game is close, they were losing, and then anytime there was a blowout, oh, guess what? That was the time that they won. I mean, so far we are 5-13 in 1-run games and 15-8 in blowout games, which is why our Pythagorean trails our actual records so dang much. But anyway, so there did seem to be a little bit of luck involved that belied their actual quality. And the Braves were the same way. They were 10-8 in one-run games. However, they were 5-10 in extra innings games. And if you remember 2021, there was a lot of those 7th inning extra inning games or 7-inning extra inning games. Like if once you got to the 7th, it would be extra innings. And they went 5-10 in those. So that's like, a good 2-3 games off of what you would expect the record to be. And their Pythagorean was only one game better than their actual. They were 37-40, like I said, at this time. They were expected to be a little bit better than that, 38-39 about. And, they still ended up with one-run games being poor at the end of the year, 26-31, and spectacular in blowout games, 28-14. So these are teams that with like similar profiles. It's like you just, as a fan, are just clenching your jaws because you can't win a damn close game, and you waste all your runs, all your sequencing of your runs are stacked together, and then you don't have them for the 7th inning of a game when you're down 1.
Yeah. So we wanted to look at kind of how these teams were each performing in individual aspects of their game, and then compare that to the Padres before kind of rounding out the discussion with upgrades that these teams made, upgrades the Padres could potentially make, et cetera, et cetera. So in 2019, the Nationals, just to put some context in there, they ended the year with a 796 OPS and a 104 WRC plus. So firmly in the upper third of the league that year. But at the point of their nadir in 2019 on May 22nd, they were 20th in the league with a 721 OPS and an 85 WRC plus. Does that sound familiar, John?
And even we have a better WRC plus than that right now.
Yes. And, again, with a lineup that sported the likes of Juan Soto, Trey Turner, et cetera, this was Anthony Rendon. And when Anthony Rendon was Anthony Rendon, this was a very, very strong offensive team that was massively, massively underperforming. This is, again, a smaller sample than what the Padres have done now. This was only about 6-7 weeks into the season for them. But, it's one of those things where we've talked about this multiple times. When something's happening in baseball, it feels like it's going to be happening forever. And that's never the case. Every time it's never the case. And so I'm sure on, Washington Nationals, congressional jacuzzi or whatever their Discord is called, they were freaking the fuck out on May 22nd with 22% playoff odds and hitting 721 and thinking that this team's offense was broken forever and that they needed to fire the hitting coaches and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then, of course, they went on to finish the year very strongly. The Braves, not quite as extreme. They were playing in a worse offensive environment at the time. It's worth it. 2021 was like the peak dead end ball era. So they finished the year with a 754 OPS and a 99 WRC plus. So like quite literally average, in terms of their offensive performance. And at their nadir in on July 23rd, 2021, they had a 745 OPS and a 97 WRC plus. So they were still underperforming what their final season total would be, but not by much. And comparing that to where the Padres are currently, the Padres have a 712 OPS. This is again on their nadir on June 21st. A 712 OPS and a 99 WRC plus. That is 19th in the league. Now, this was something that was mentioned on the Padres hot tub group therapy that aired this week, which was that, obviously for the Padres this year, talking about how terrible they've been in runners in scoring position is very in vogue. And for good reason. They are, as
yes.
was said in a Substack this week, called Letters to AJ, which is very good. I recommend you check it out. That they are the worst runners in scoring position hitting team since the Bronze Age, which is technically correct because they are the worst in baseball history, hitting sub 200 at the time of their nadir. So that, while that was 100% true, it's actually not as bad as the fact of that the Padres are incredibly unclutch hitting in games that are late and close. So I'm going to skip ahead to their stats because they're like so gobsmackingly awful. And then we'll go back to the Nationals and the Braves. So far, in this season, the Padres in late and close games, this is over 465 plate appearances as a team. They are slashing 174, 289, 272. That is a 561 OPS. That is the total OPS on that, comparing that to all OPSs across baseball, OPS pluses, I should say, is 57. And the split OPS plus, so comparing that to that same split across baseball, is a 66. So they're hitting with basically 2/3 of a hitter every time they come up to the plate when the game is late and close. It's by the way worse than the runners in scoring position. I believe their total OPS plus is like a 65 or something like that. So they are hitting worse late and close in games than they are with runners in scoring position. Now comparing that to the Nationals and the Braves, the Braves were also a team that struggled late and close. Now, not nearly as much as the Padres did.
Because that's impossible.
Yeah, because that is truly impossible. But in 913 plate appearances, they slashed 213, 301, 372. That's a 674 OPS, an 80 total OPS plus, and only a 94 split OPS plus. So not that much worse than league average that year in those positions. However, the 2019 Nationals excelled hitting late in games, and that may not be surprising given the fact that certainly as the year went on, they shored up a terrible bullpen, and their starters really started to perform well. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but they slashed 252, 336, 464. That's an 800 OPS, which total OPS plus is a 100, but in the split OPS plus, so compared to other teams in that year, late and close in games, they had a 120 OPS plus. So they were truly excellent hitting late and close in games.
Do you remember before the season started when it was like the word amongst fans and even the players was no lead is safe? Do you know when every lead is safe? When you bat 174, 289, 272 whenever the game is late and close. I don't know if you defined it. I know that you defined it on the Padres Hot Tub, but I don't know if you defined late and close on this episode. But
yes, sorry, I should say that. So it's the seventh inning or later in games where the game is either tied, the batting team is ahead by 1 run, or you're behind, but you have the tying run at least on deck. So, if you're thinking, again, if you're behind, that means you're behind by 2. If there's no one, you're coming up in the inning and no one's, you have nobody on and blah, 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 then the tying run would be on deck. So and obviously as you get more guys on base, that improves. But it's a really cool stat because it's like, it really encapsulates like situations where you really want guys hitting and and they're not. And I think I honestly already clicked out of the page. So I if you want to listen to the full player breakdown, go listen to the Padres Hot Tub from June 23rd. But our guys outside of Juan Soto are all hitting like abysmally. Like Manny has like a 374 OPS. Like in these situations, Cronenworth is like a 395. Even Tatis, hitting as well as he's hitting is like a 555 OPS. So it's bad. Like it's just really truly bad.
Which is why Padres fans are trying to say bring back the bunt. We have the best lineup like ever constructed in Padres history. You would think from a name standpoint, and all of our fans are. We got to start bunting more. But that's because if you have a 300 OPS when there's late and close games, then yeah, maybe you should bunt. You can get a 300. You're going to get a couple hits off of a bunt just on accident, and then at least it's not a double play.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's that their slugging percentage is lower than their on base percentage, which is that classic like no pop, like absolutely no pop in these situations. And it's a team that looks for walks, so of course their on base percentage is going to be higher than most, and it compared, there's still a 100 plus point difference between their batting average and their OBP, in those situations. So, they're still doing a good job of getting walks. It's just they're not really doing much else at all well. So it's kind of a sad situation, and one that I would suspect does not continue over the course of the year. I don't think they could hit worse than that if they tried. Like, truly. If they these guys are so good. I don't know how many times I was about to relaunch into we have Tatis, we have Soto, we have Machado, we have Bogarts, etc. I can't do it, but it's like they're not going to hit that poorly the rest of the year. I would be willing to put a lot on that.
At some point, you got to hit rock bottom and just be like, okay, I can
it.
do whatever I want. This is
it,
the
John.
nadir, right? This is the Ralph.
This is the nadir.
I would never discount psychology in this, but there's that Yogi Berra quote that it's baseball is 90% mental, the other half is physical, and baseball is a mental game, and you could say that there's bad luck, and there is. I would imagine that there's a little bit of both going on, where we had a lot of bad luck in these late and close situations, and then now you're thinking about it. Now you got that in your head. Who was the player that Craig said was thinking about his fantasy team?
I think it was Adam Eaton.
Was it Adam Eaton?
The pitcher Adam Eaton, yeah.
Yeah. And, that proves that some people go to their at-bat with a thought in their head. And if it's like, I'm going to get all of our clutch stats up right now with this one swing, then you're probably not putting your best swing on the ball, And so I do think that there's probably a little bit of psychology playing into that, where you're like, damn, dude, like, I got to eventually get a hit, right? And you're just squeezing the sawdust out of the bat. But at some point, it's just like, okay, what we're doing isn't working. Just go back to, ground level. Go back to the first thing that you ever knew about hitting a baseball and do that with runners in scoring position.
Yeah. So I want to quickly just go through how these teams were pitching as teams. And then I want to get into kind of the upgrades they made. And then we can kind of talk about how those upgrades worked out and the splits from these guys before talking about the Padres and what upgrades they might make. So the pitching for the 2019 Nationals at their May 22nd nadir, they finished the year, just to provide context, with a 4.28 ERA and a 3.07 WOBA allowed for hitters. At the time of their nadir, they had a 4.94 ERA and a 3.20 WOBA allowed. And I'm going to break that down a little bit more in later on when we talk about splits, but that's being pushed by the fact that they had the worst bullpen in baseball that year at that time. By far and away. They had it over a 6 ERA at that point, and it didn't get much better. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. The Braves, who finished the year with a 3.89 ERA and a 3.03 WOBA allowed, at the time of their nadir on July 23rd, 2021, had a ERA of 4.24 and a WOBA allowed of 3.11. So you can see they had about a third of a run lower ERA by the end of the year than they did on July 23rd, which means between July 23rd and the end of the year, they pitched very, very well. And also the WOBA was 8 points lower. So we saw some regression there. Potentially to what we would have expected prior to the season. And the Padres currently on June 21st at their nadir had a ERA of 3.79, notably much lower than these other teams, putting all the run environment stuff from the year, etc. aside. And their WOBA was 3.02. And we'll talk about that again in a second. But that is largely carried by the fact that the Padres have an incredible bullpen and good, not great starting pitching so far. And but adding that together, it's a pretty strong. It's their 7th in the league right now with those numbers, even being at their nadir and being 4 games below 500 at the time of this. So, John, why don't you take us through how each of these two future World Series teams upgraded themselves at the trade deadline?
Yeah, and we'll probably do an episode that kind of focuses on possible targets going forward in a future episode as the trade deadline approaches. But for now, talking about the 2019 Nats, they really didn't do a whole lot at the trade deadline. They basically upgraded their bullpen. They got Daniel Hudson, who ended up being very, very valuable for them down the stretch.
Padres legend.
And then Padres legend Daniel Hudson, current Dodger, so we don't like him anymore. And then they also got Hunter Strickland and Ronis Elias as well, who contributed less for them. But Hudson ended up being an incredibly important part of their playoff makeup. He had a 1.44 ERA for them down the stretch, and like you said, for a terrible bullpen. And then he had, I mean, if you remember the playoffs, it was basically like, let's try to get it to Daniel Hudson, and he'll pitch like the 8th and or 9th. And he ended up having 9 appearances in the playoffs, 9.2 innings. He only had a 3.72 ERA, but for them that was valuable. Just to have like even a 3.72 ERA, towards the end of every game was super, super valuable for them. And kind of the premise of this argument that I'm making, the manner in which we relate to both these teams, is that they had deficits, but those deficits were so specific that you could attack those deficits very specifically. They're not just middling teams overall, and then you go, okay, which of these mediocre spots do I upgrade? I would have to upgrade all of them in order to make a great team. It's not like that. There's very specific deficits. For the Nationals, it was bullpen. And when you kind of ameliorate that weakness, your team just immediately gets much, much better. And the Braves were the same way. They had, obviously, the Acuna injury, but they traded for an entire outfield. They got Jock Peterson, they got Jorge Soler, they got Adam Duvall, they got Eddie Rosario. Like, they got 4 outfielders at the trade deadline, which is just like, what is it? What are you even doing? That's like a crazy thing to do. But no, they basically rebuilt an entire outfield because that was their deficit. They were strong on the infield. They had a deficit in the outfield. And now suddenly they're a cohesive team. There's no strong weakness on the team. They also got Stephen Vogt. They had the Richard Rodriguez that didn't work out quite as well for them. But the point here is that when you have a specific deficit and you just, fix that specific deficit, your team can do much better than if you have a bunch of holes, littered throughout the lineup, and you have to make a bajillion trades in order to increase the value of your team. Did you want to go into like how they ended up performing?
Yeah. So just quickly to talk about how things kind of worked out for these two teams. The Nats, at the time of their nadir on May 22nd, they had basically everyone not named Anthony Rendon was underperforming, certainly relative to how they would end the season. So Anthony Rendon had a 169 WRC plus. That's very nice. But everyone else, Juan Soto had a 124, which, does that sound familiar, John?
Yeah, he's broken. He's broken.
124 WRC plus. Oh, he's broken. Now, of course, we didn't know who Juan Soto was at the time, but, talking about Juan Soto being broken, he was striking out twice as much as he was walking at this time for the Nationals, which is very out of character, as we know, for Juan Soto. He was,
can't even imagine that.
He was slugging. He was slugging 490. He still had an 863 OPS. But his OBP was in a lowly 374 at this time. So he was underperforming. Howie Kendrick, again, the perennial superstar Howie Kendrick, had a 117 WRC plus, which probably you're like, oh, Howie Kendrick had a 117 WRC plus. That's great. He finished the year with a 147 WRC plus. So he just had absolute career year of his life in 370 plate appearances, being utilized exactly how he should have been utilized, very smartly. And and then
for reference, Fernando Tatis right now has a 150 WRC plus, and it seems like he's just killing it. So Howie Kendrick put up a Tatis so far season over the whole season.
Yes.
Wow.
Which is insane. They had the Nats also. They didn't have Trey Turner at the beginning of the year. He was hurt, so he was coming in late. He comes into the lineup and then puts up a 118 WRC plus, with elite speed and playing Trey Turner defense and everything, et cetera, et cetera. So they benefited from that. They also did not have Asdrubal Cabrera, who only put up 146 plate appearances for them over the course of the year, but in those 146 plate appearances had a 145 WRC plus. It was truly crazy. And then, again, it's like, they had their catcher, Kurt Suzuki, who was like a longtime veteran who was in a playing time split with them, who ends up putting up a 105 WRC plus, which is like super valuable from the catching position. So, they were getting small things from different places. Adam Eaton,
The other
Padres
one.
legend.
No, the other one.
The other one is had a 108 WRC plus in 656 plate appearances. So, it's like they were getting really strong offensive performances, and really importantly, compared to where they were at their nadir, regression. They got positive regression from their main guys. The Braves at their nadir, they had Acuna being Acuna, but then now hurt and out for the rest of the year with a torn ACL. He had a 157 WRC plus. And Freddie Freeman being Freddie Freeman with a 140 WRC plus. But again, everyone else on their team was underperforming relative to where they would end up. Austin Riley at the time had a 118 WRC plus. Again, good, but not as good as the 136 WRC plus that he finished the year with. Ozzie Albies had a 113 WRC plus that actually was a little bit better than where he finished. But the important thing, John, is that they added, as you mentioned, Jock Peterson, Jorge Soler, Eddie Rosario, and who am I missing? There's a fourth guy.
Did you do Adam Duvall?
I did not do Adam Duvall. Thank you very much. They added Peterson, Duvall, Soler, and Rosario. All four of those hitters in the time they were in Atlanta had WRC pluses over 100. Okay, so they were all above league average contributors, which is like, I don't want to take away from the skill and they knew what they were doing in terms of the trade, but it is kind of lucky in a way too, like to have four guys come. They have to have four guys come and then all four of them be like absolute hits. We will do, as John mentioned, an episode later on talking about what happens when people are traded to the Padres and, how they perform relative. But that just a sneak preview. That's not how they perform when they come here. Okay. They do not come and perform at an above average clip. Rosario. You're not yet. Rosario and Soler specifically put up 133 and 132 WRC pluses respectively. So pretty crazy stuff that they saw. And it makes sense when you think about the fact that they had a 7% odds of making the playoffs, and then they just became this juggernaut to end the final 2 months of the year. So quickly to the pitcher splits. This is for the Nationals. This is from their second nadir. This is the 33.1% chance that they had on June 15th. I picked that because it's very close to where the Padres are in their season. Their starters had a 3.91 ERA and a 2.97 WOBA allowed. That's pretty good. They were 8th in the league, but their bullpen had a 6.27 ERA and 3.44 WOBA allowed. That's dead last in the league. So as you can imagine, they were blowing a lot of games late, and it was very frustrating, et cetera, et cetera. They finished the year, their starters, with a 3.53 ERA and a 2.90 WOBA, so they improved dramatically. That was second in the league in ERA for starters for that entire season, so it's very impressive. And the relievers, they still finished 29th in the league, but their bullpen ERA went from 6.27 at their nadir to 5.68 at the end of the year, and 3.44 WOBA allowed to 3.37. So improvement, kind of, but still improvement. So everything trended positively, which is the point that we're trying to drive at for them. Behind, by the way, truly elite starting pitching in Scherzer.
And they got Daniel Hudson, who put up a 1.44 ERA in order to drive the relief ERA down to a 5.68. Like, oh my God. Jeez, yeah. He's fighting against that's a Sisyphusian task.
Yeah, no kidding. So the Braves pitcher splits, by the way, on July 23rd, their starters had a 4.05 ERA and a 3.04 WOBA. That is right in the middle, 14th in the league, compared for that year. Again, this is the dead ball era. And if their relievers had a 4.53 ERA and a 3.21 WOBA. That is 21st in the league. So they're in the bottom third of the league for bullpen. Now, at the end of the season, the starters finished with a 3.84 ERA and a 2.98 WOBA. That is 7th overall. So that's improvement. But perhaps more importantly, the relievers finished with a sub-4 ERA at 3.97 and a 3.09 WOBA allowed. That's 10th in the league. So the bullpen went from 21st in the league to 10th in the league. Very, very impressive. And mind you, that 10th in the league figure, that's on the whole season. So in that block from, their nadir on July 23rd until the end of the year, they were incredible. They were truly, truly fantastic. And before I pass it back over to you, John, just to kind of put in perspective, like where the Padres pitchers are currently, the starters have a 4.09 ERA and a 3.11 WOBA allowed. That's 10th in the league. But as I mentioned, our relievers have a 3.34 ERA and a 2.87 WOBA. That is third in baseball. We have still, despite what happened in the games prior to them hitting their nadir, an elite bullpen. That is, in fact, a callback to our last episode. But the Padres do have an elite bullpen. So, John, why don't you tell us about where the Padres are currently?
We have an elite bullpen, and we have hopefully Suarez coming back, and hopefully Tom Cosgrove isn't out for very long. It did seem like we missed him a lot during that Giants season. But yeah, and it's to kind of call back to what you were just talking about with the kind of progression, the positive regression of the Nats and Braves lineups in particular. You just think about this, like how ours might end up looking if we are successful. There's so many candidates for improvement, like Jake Cronenworth at his 91 WRC plus. If he even pops up to over 100, that's a huge improvement for our lineup going forward. Manny Machado at 95 WRC plus. I mean, his career is closer to 130. Like, that's a lot of improvement that you could see in that second half graph when we go back over the Padres 2023 World Championship season. And then Nelson Cruz, 86. Matt Carpenter, 80. For some reason, Austin Nola is still getting plate appearances when he has a 39 WRC plus, so that catcher position has a great chance to improve. But I'm just saying, like, you putting that little graph out there makes me see, like, who are our guys? And we have a lot of options for people that can improve. But like I said, where the Padres are at currently, we have scored 319 runs now. Well, actually, probably more. Yeah, because I did this yesterday. So 13 more than that, 332 runs. And how much did we give up yesterday? 3 runs? I think so. So then 294 against, which gives us a Pythagorean record of 42 and 34 against our actual record of 37 and 39 as of this recording today. I don't know exactly what happens later today. I am assuming that Matt Waldron throws a complete game no-hitter with his knuckleball and we move closer to 500, but I don't know that yet. So that Pythagorean record puts us at a 90 win pace, which is not far off our projections at the beginning of the season. But if you keep that Pythagorean record with our 5 win deficit of what has been expected so far, that puts us closer to an 85 win pace. And that kind of is right in alignment with what Fangraphs thinks, which is that we are on pace for about 86 wins, which is good news and bad news. An 86 win team is a team that can make it to the playoffs. The Rays made it to the playoffs last year with 86 wins. However, the Brewers also did not make it to the playoffs last year with 86 wins. And if you just look at the projections, Fangraphs now has us currently, as of today, outside of our nadir, because we won 2 more games, at a 51.7% chance of getting to the playoffs. And Baseball Reference is right around the same at 48.9, which are both obviously coin flip opportunities. A little bit of scary part about that is that they also both project us to be 4th in the division, because they project the Dodgers to get up to 91 wins and pass the Diamondbacks. The Diamondbacks, with their hot start, even with the regression, they project them to have 89 wins, the Giants 88, and then, like I said, us with 86. So it's, it is a coin flip, and it is a part of that is because of how many wins we have to win, and part of that is because of how many teams we have to pass. But it is kind of nice to see that, like, we haven't been performing well, and still, despite us not performing well, we could have expected to win more games. So, like, we're overcoming all odds to be a good enough team to win, but we're not actually winning. But there is some correlations between just the Padres. Like, so you went over the late and close, but also just with runners in scoring position, we have a 75 WRC plus overall. And then that's compared to the 99, 100 WRC plus outside of that. So you take us out of our runners in scoring position, we're an above average team. You put us in runners in scoring position, we're a terrible team. And there's, we all know that. We've seen that. We did an episode on it. We know that that's happening. But it's what's leading us to have a 5-13 record in one-run games and an 0-6 record in extra innings games. You give us just a few of those wins back, we're a 500 team or above. And maybe this is not such a dire, straight for the Padres fans watching it, complaining about having to kill themselves when people talk about the Braves and the Nationals. But the thing that makes us similar, I think, to those Braves and Nationals teams is that the upgrades are so dang specific. If you just look at our team, I'm going to start positively because that's a great way to start. At second base, we're third in the league in WRC plus with a 127 WRC plus. You'll take that from your second base spot every time. At shortstop, we're eighth in the league with a 109 WRC plus. That's obviously been mostly Bogarts, which proves that, even just being a little bit above average is much above average at shortstop. And however, just to kind of go with our argument about that we put forth in the Cronenworth episode, the very onset of our nascent par days, his Xander Bogaerts' production would be good for 17th best at first base, which kind of shows like pushing everybody down that batting lineup. What we did was essentially replace a first base option with a shortstop. And then, so yeah, he's 8th in WRC plus at the shortstop position, but he would be 17th at the first base position. So, I mean, did that really improve our lineup? How much did it improve it? Maybe not as much as we're thinking. Third base is 18th with a 96 WRC plus, primarily because Manny Machado has struggled. There's no worry there, I don't think, unless Manny Machado's injured and we don't know about it. I think that's just going to have progression, so that's still going to be a strength of our team. And then at left field, first in the league with 156 WRC plus. That's as good as you're going to get. You're happy with that, you'll stamp it. At right field, fifth in the league with a 124 WRC plus, and that's only going to get better if Tatis continues as he does, because right now he has 150 WRC plus. And then you kind of made the argument going on the Padres Hot Tub podcast that, you get what you get from center field from the bat, and if you can have great defense, you have great defense. And I would argue that that's mostly true because Trent Grisham is providing great defense. He is, however, 23rd in WRC plus with an 86, well, at least center field position overall. So I would argue that, having some malleability, maybe not this year, but going forward where Tatis can shift over to center field, at least against certain matchups, would probably up that center field WRC plus while still getting consistently good at bats from that right field position. But either way, that's not like the thing that's worth, tearing us down and really like making us really poor overall. What is our weaknesses, which are very clear, obvious upgrades. One is that we have the 28th best WRC plus from the catcher position with a 59 WRC plus, with, Gary Sanchez mostly like drawing that way up because Noel's actual numbers are 144, 263, and 195 for a 39 WRC plus. That's crazy. It's been 3 months into the season, and the catcher who has got the most appearances for us has a 144, 263, 195 slash. How can your slugging be 70 points below your on-base percentage? That's just okay.
That's what happens when you call a great game, John. it's so amazing. All of his brain power is being used to call that great game. You can't expect him to slug at the same time.
Oh my God. 144, 263, 195. I can't even believe it. I look at it every time. I can't believe it. But anyways, so there's like clear and obvious way to very quickly improve your team. And then the second thing is first base. So first base has a 29th best WRC plus at 70.
Who was worse, 70 by the way? Do you know?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't remember. There's actually there were folks that were worse at catcher, and that was Cleveland was actually the worst, and Pittsburgh was actually worse than us too. And I was like, oh my God, how is that even possible? But Gary Sanchez kind of drove us above them. But yeah, so somebody's worse at first base. I don't know who. But 70 WRC plus is just not acceptable from first base, right? That's not even like something that's debatable. You can't get 70 WRC plus from your first base position and expect to potentially win the World Series, right? And then DH is 20th at a 94 WRC plus. So my argument would be that there's just two fixes that you need to make, which is improve catcher. Hopefully Campusano comes back and reforms, but if not, Somebody has to. Like, that's just obvious. Somebody has to. And then getting a first baseman who is not, you don't even need a first baseman and a DH, I would argue. I think that you need a first baseman who then you can push Cronenworth over to second, Kim over to short or third, whenever you want in a given day, and give, one person a day off, or at least off their feet, so that they could be the DH. And you would expect better than 94 WRC plus just from Xander, Manny, Kim, Cronenworth taking those spots at DH while they all shift around. There's two spots. Two things would make a huge difference on our offense, because everything else, every other spot besides center field is locked down at a well above average bat. And then in center field, you still have a good defense. And these things are kind of baked into those little projections going forward, because, we only have that coin flip top chance to get to the playoffs. According to Fangraphs, it's the 51.7%. However, they suggest that if we actually make it, if we land on tails when we say tails never fails, there's a great chance that we go on to be successful, which is why I would push back against anybody who says, I would rather us just lose and not even make it to the playoffs than make it because I want AJ Preller fired. Give me the spin of the dice or the roll of the dice, because Fangraphs suggests that we have the third best odds of winning the World Series. And that's baking in the chance that there's only a 50% chance that we even make it to the playoffs. Sorry, among National League teams. So third best behind the Braves and the Dodgers of winning the World Series. Should we make it? Not even should we make it to the playoffs right now. And so that will double if we get actually into the playoffs. That's a role you want to take. Like, I want to win the World Series. That's what I want to do, right? That's the goal of the year. And if we're the third most likely team in the National League, and that's actually true, go for it, right? Third most likely means that it's pretty dang likely that it could happen. And you have these modest upgrades, rotation performing well, bullpen performing well, lineup performing well at specific spots, and then terribly at specific spots. Just a couple upgrades, and your team is rolling.
Yeah, I said this to you before we started recording, but I think that mentality of let's just punt this year and sell our guys that are going to be free agents and retool for 2024. I think it's just a way to cope with the idea that this has been really a difficult stretch of baseball to watch for the team. And it also is it felt like, we had endured, again, I'm 28 years old, so I'm not going to say I personally endured a half century of garbage baseball, but, as a fan base, the fan base has collectively endured half a century of garbage baseball, and that we're finally through to the promised land. We had basically suffered enough as a fan base that we had earned this right to kind of relish in having a truly good team. And then for it to, putter out of the gate was, I think, more painful than we realized it would be, and difficult for people to handle. And I don't blame anyone or fault anyone for that at all. Is there anything else, because we got to wrap this up and get out of here, that you want to add before we do so?
Yes, just a couple quick Ralph Nader quotes for you. He said, "Your best teacher is your last mistake." So we're gonna be learning. Have been taught from our late and close situations and improve going forward. And he also said, "If God hadn't meant for us to eat sugar, he wouldn't have invented dentists." Okay, so this is the wisdom that our Nader is providing for us.
Wow. So, I suppose that means the sweetness of watching Juan Soto and Fernando Tatis Jr. play baseball is what Ralph Nader was referring to. But much like mens rea, after this discussion, this thing is finished. So we hope that you enjoyed our discussion of the Padres. We are saying that there's a chance. There's a chance. There's certainly a chance, and there are certainly things that this team could do to improve itself very quickly, very targeted things, and that is something that it shares in its DNA with the 2019 Nationals and the 2021 Braves. But that being said, this is baseball. Nothing is promised in this sport, and there's a lot of chaos and randomness that will ensue. So if you want to hear more about the potential pieces that the Padres will be able to bring in to fix some of these deficiencies, Well, you'll just have to listen to one of our next episodes when we'll be covering that. But for John Precoda, I'm Raphie Cantor. This has been Pods of Replacement, and we will see you next time.